Hello, my name is Ryan Leone. I'm sure a lot of you subscribe to my channel already, but if you don't, this is a little bit different than what I usually do. Usually I do crazy episodic stories about my life as a junkie and ex-con. But I wanted to start a video, how to turn your crazy life experiences into a book and a film. A lot of people send me messages, hey, I've been through all this and I want to be able to express it somehow. And it's a dream that I've had for years and years and years to be a best-selling author. I've sold 120,000 copies of my book since it was published in 2014. I self-published it, even though that was a stigmatized thing to do. I had 3 offers from legitimate companies, like very small independent labels, and I decided to self-publish it. And like I said, I've sold 120,000 copies. The film version, Love in Vain, is in development right now by the screenwriter Spun, Will de los Santos. He adapted my book into a screenplay. And I want to teach you everything, the writing process, the publishing process, and how to infiltrate the film industry, how to promote it. And you don't need an agent. You don't need a label behind you. I'm going to explain all of those aspects as well, because I've had an agent, I have a manager currently, but I learned a lot of things throughout my years as a writer. I've been a published writer since I was 9. I got my first short story published when I was 9. I had poetry published in high school, various short stories, essays, the book in 2014, multiple screenplays. And you don't have to have innate writing ability to be able to publish a best-selling book. If you can write an email, if you can send a text message, I can teach you a very conversational, easy, accessible, stylistic way to communicate your life story. Even if you're dictating it and then getting it transcribed later, we can figure out how to market it, how to structure it, and how to realize your dreams. I had parole officers, I've had cops, I've had COs tell me my entire life that I was worthless and that I would never amount to shit. And I did it all myself. I learned how to do it, and I'd like to give back to you. I think that being altruistic and helping others is a key aspect of staying off drugs, and I'm happy to say that I'm not on hard drugs anymore, and I think fitness, creativity, and being altruistic are the 3 pillars of what keeps me sober, not to mention the fact that I'm a new father, and that helps keep me balanced. Now, people are always asking me, well, where do I start? What do I do? What do I outline? So let's start with the beginning. Let me tell you a story of how it happened for me, how I got started, and give you some tips. I'm probably going to do 10 of these videos, and I'll cover every aspect. And then I'm going to do more in-detailed versions, more in-depth versions on iTunes, and I'll sell them for $5 a lesson. But this is free to you, and I hope that you can apply some of these principles and help see your dreams come true. So before we start, the absolute prerequisite for anybody that wants to write a book is you have to read books all the time. Now, there's a lot of people that want to write books, but they say that they never have time to read. If you don't have time to read, you definitely don't have time to write. And you need to read to get that inherent understanding of structural narrative, syntax, diction, voice, style. There's 2 things that make you a great writer, and that's style and voice. Stephen King talks about it in the book On Writing, a book that I definitely recommend everybody read if you're interested in becoming a writer. And he talks about style and voice and how you can open a page of any book, and if it's a great writer, you'll know right away just by reading that page who it is. I can read any page of Hunter S. Thompson and know that it's him that wrote it. And I released my book, Wasting Talent, as fiction. I novelized real experiences that I've been through. And a lot of my heroes, Hunter S. Thompson, Charles Bukowski, John Fonte, Dan Fonte, Jonathan Shaw, Jerry Stahl, Tony O'Neill, Joe Clifford, Tom Pitts, Irvine Welsh. It goes on and on and on. Bret Easton Ellis. These guys used life experiences to make Roman Clef novels that, or in Hunter S. Thompson's case, gonzo journalism, to be able to express what actually happened in a fictionalized way. The reason being is that it gives you more creative liberty. You don't have to stay adherent to chronology. That happened with James Frey. He presented his memoir as nonfiction, and he embellished a lot of stuff, and he got crucified because of it. I'll always release my material as fiction so that I have that creative liberty, and I recommend that to you as well. It's been effective for me. So reading is the very first thing you have to do. And if you don't know what books to read, there's a great website called goodreads.com, which is essentially a social media platform for book readers. And you do some initial assessment, you tell Goodreads which books you've already read. It'll start recommending books that are similar, and it will get you with a network of like-minded readers, and you guys can exchange reading ideas. And there's all these great books. You can type junkie books, and you can get this huge list of all the best junkie books ever written, or whatever. Anything that you're interested in, they have lists, and they have a community where you guys can share ideas off each other for what to read. So I recommend starting with reading. And not just books. I read the LA Times every morning before I do anything. You know, my girl makes me coffee. I read the LA Times. I'll go on Twitter. I follow a lot of news outlets, and I'll pick which articles I want to read. You have to read and you have to write every day if you want to be a professional writer. Period. I forget what the exact quote is, but I love in Good Will Hunting when he's talking about how, you know, the guy at Harvard had spent $250,000 on his education, and Matt Damon had gotten his education for $5 in overdraft fees at the public library. Absolutely true. I got my education from being in federal prison and reading a novel a day. I've probably read 1,000 novels in my life, and it gave me that inherent understanding of how to compose them properly. So when I had gone to prison in 2009, I had lived a pretty crazy life up until that point. You know, I grew up upper middle class. I'd been expelled from 3 high schools within the span of a month when I was a teenager, and I was institutionalized in programs for troubled adolescents. And then I got involved brokering media with Spike TV, and then I started selling drugs on a big scale, and eventually I got busted by the feds, by the FBI and DEA, and I went to federal prison. So I'd lived a pretty crazy life up until that point. I was 23 when I went into prison, and I decided that I wanted to start writing a book, but I didn't know where to start. So I had my dad send me some books. Elements of Style, which is a very small book. Forget, Strunk and White are the name of the authors. One of the guys that wrote Charlotte's Web wrote that book, and it's a book on very simple grammar rules. And, you know, simple things like omit needless words. You always want to go and take the fat off of what you write. We'll get into that when we get more into the stylistic choices and approaches to writing. But you want to read On Writing and the Elements of Style. And I also got a book called The Complete Idiot's Guide to Writing a Novel. And it gave me the very basic ingredients I needed to know about character development, setting, dialogue, exposition, composition, etc., etc. You should read a few books like that just so that you have some guidance. And I'm going to try to teach you all that I can from my perspective. It might be easier learning from someone like me, but I don't know. If you're the kind of people learn in different ways, if you're the kind of person that learns better by reading, those are the books that I recommend getting for how to write. And when I got to prison, I didn't know where to start, and the very first thing that I wrote was a short story called The Pocket Butthole, which has become one of like the staples of my book. I mean, that's what everybody always brings up when they mention wasting talent. Will De Los Santos, who wrote Spun, told me that was his absolute favorite part of the book. That's what made him want to give me the film deal. And that was a 1-page short story that I wrote based on a real experience I had with the pocket butthole. I wrote it on a piece of paper and I passed it around to people in federal prison. I was at MDCLA. It's probably November of 2009, something like that. And I got very good responses. I think it's important when you start trying to write to give it to other people and to get feedback and to get words of encouragement, because it really helps you. And that's one of the reasons that I want to teach you how to write a book and how to turn it into a film. As drug addicts, we have this very inherent self-esteem deficit, and having a tangible accomplishment like a book or a film makes you feel a lot better about yourself. You know, you can actually, yeah, you made mistakes, but it's almost vindication. It's like, I made mistakes, but now I wrote a book about it. It's going to help dissuade the next generation from, you know, not getting involved with the opioid crisis that's about to, you know, hopefully we figure out smart ways to prevent it, but it's about to massacre an entire new generation of drug addicts. And hopefully you can capitalize on your life experiences, and you can also help people at the same time. That's really what it's all about, making the world a better place. I had an epiphany the last time I was in prison that the way to do that, I was trying to do all this stuff with a nonprofit, but the real way to affect change is through artistry. I joke a lot, and a lot of my stuff is satirical and comedic, but at the end of the day, there's subtext about the evils of the prison industrial complex and the horrors of addiction, and I hope that's what people get out of my work. So back to how I started. You know, I wrote the Pocket Butthole short story. People liked it, and they gave me, you know, words of encouragement. Said that I had done a really good job. And I didn't return to that was just a short story. And that short story, the way that it is in the book and in the film, is exactly the way I wrote it the very first time, without any rewrites. It was just kind of stream of conscious writing. And it made it to the final book, and it's still there to this day. I never edited it. It was just, and it's in its original form because I thought it would be, I just thought it would be cool to preserve the first thing that I ever wrote for the book that way. I get to a rougher prison called Victorville, still in 2009, and I decided to start writing a book. Now, there's different schools of thoughts on outlining your book. Some people say that you should outline. Some people say that you should have a more organic approach. That's what Stephen King espouses. Have an idea, let the characters develop themselves. Some people make an actual outline. I've done that for screenplays where I use index cards and map everything out. Screenplays are a little more formulaic than novels. Novels, you have that, you have much more, you're not confined to parameters set by structure. You can basically do whatever kind of structure you want. You can do linear, non-linear. You can approach a novel however you want. And what I had done with Wasting Talent is I had maybe 7 or 8 core stories that were good. Me stabbing the skinhead, the Mike Virgin story, when my friend OD'd and we put ice cubes up his asshole and his butthole started bleeding. I had like 6, 7, maybe 8 of these stories. So what I did is I thought about the stories that I wanted to include in the book, and then I came up with a metaphorical narrative to try to convey the way that I felt and to tie everything together in a cohesive fashion. And what that was is I made the protagonist, which was really me, I made him an alter ego named Damien Cantwell. And Damien was a musician, a prodigy guitar player that could have been a successful, famous rock star, but he got derailed from his addiction. And the whole premise of the book is about how he's wasting his talent and how he eventually finds and falls in love with a woman who makes him less nihilistic and actually makes him start caring about something besides himself and his own greedy addiction. And that's the redemptive quality at the end of the book. He realizes that Blair, the love interest, was something, it was an actual loss that he had endured. Before that he was just on impulse and on all selfish, greedy, self-need stuff. With some subtext too about how drug addicts use comedy to deflect sensitivity. That's why I made it darkly satirical. It was in an effort to try to make you understand how drug addictions use humor to cope with very ugly, morose situations. And those themes developed after I started writing the story. So I had these, let's just say, 8 core stories, and I had to connect the dots. And I didn't do this in a glorified outline or anything. I had it in my mind that I wanted to incorporate these particular stories, and then I came up with that narrative thread where Damien was a prodigy rock star with the love interest of Blair, and it tied the entire It tied the entire story together. So that's the way that I recommend doing it. It was effective for me. I recommend thinking about maybe 8 stories from your crazy life. Come up with 8 stories and then figure out some fictional way to tie it all together. And I think that it was very effective. And then the themes developed after that. So people always say, well, I don't even know how to start the book. I always think that you should start a book with some sort of hook. You know, in the opening scene of my book, Damien stabs a skinhead, something that really happened to me in real life, and it opens the book, you know, with a banger. And then the second chapter, it's retrospective and it goes back. And then it makes the people wait until chapter 3 to catch up with, you know, the present tense of the story. So I thought it was an effective way to open with a hook, have a second chapter that kind of slows that momentum, makes people very invested, but then it gives the background story, and then I go back into the linear structure of the book, and it just goes, it's linear from that point. From chapter 3 on, it's a linear story with a few flashbacks tied in. So I think that after you find your 8 stories, you find one that would be a good catalyst for the entire story, a good hook, get people interested. You know, a lot of times with Amazon, you can preview the book. You want people hooked. If they're not hooked by the first 5 or 6 pages, then you're not doing a good enough job. So you got to start with a hook. And so I started writing by hand at Victorville. I wrote maybe 150 pages, and that was like the first version of it. And every time that I read anything about writing, what people had always talked about was that the art of writing is in the rewrites. And I forget who said it, but somebody did an analogy one time, and they said, the first draft is like building a house. The second draft is decorating the house and putting furniture in it, putting all the artistry in it. And that's what I really learned. I pretty much wrote Wasting Talent 8 or 9 times. I just rewrote it from front to back. And every time I did it, I would take, you know, some of the stuff that wasn't working out. I would refine it. I would omit needless words, as the Elements of Style tells you to do. And every time that I refined it, it got tighter and tighter and tighter. That's what good writing is. It's tight. You have to have an economy of language and use as least amount of words possible. Now, if you don't have innate writing talent, like I talked about, if you can learn how to write in a conversational way that's accessible, remember, the easier it is for you to write it, the more conversational you write it, the easier it's going to be for people to read it. And then you get a much wider audience, you know, a much wider readership by making it easy, not a bunch of flowery adjectives, not too ornate. Minimalism. Say things as simply as possible. Use 8 of your core stories and then come up with some metaphorical narrative to tie it all together. And that's how I wrote Wasting Talent. The entire time that I was writing it, I was reading a lot of books and I was seeing what worked, you know? If you read a book and you say, oh, that worked really well, that he painted a vivid picture. If you're just starting out, I wouldn't worry so much about descriptive writing. I would worry more about just getting an actual story out there. And, you know, after I had written Wasting Talent the first time, the first draft, about 150 pages of it, I got transferred from Victorville to another prison called FCI Oxford, which was in Wisconsin. And at this prison, they had a computer lab with Microsoft Word on it, but you could only use it if you were signed up for college correspondence classes. So there's a number of, like LSU had them, Ohio University had them, and you could sign up for these college correspondence classes, and then you would be privy to the computer lab, and you'd be able to use it whenever you wanted to. And, you know, and it was very exclusive, like maybe 2 or 3 inmates at this entire prison could use the computer lab. And so what I did is I had my dad sign me up for a creative writing class, and then I would go up to the computer lab, and instead of working on the actual creative writing lessons, I would just work on my book every day. that's another thing. You have to have a structured regimen and routine with how you're writing. So I would go to the computer lab every single day and pretend that I was working on college correspondence class, and I would put headings on each chapter that would say like lesson 1, the art of a dynamic prologue, but that would actually be chapter 1. Lesson 2, how to develop characters, but lesson 2 would be chapter 2, and so forth. And they would print the stuff out for me, and I worked on it altogether, I worked on Wasting Talent for 3 years, and the last 2 years of it, I was working 6 hours a day in the computer lab. Sometimes I would just be on one page the entire time and just stare at it and figure out which words I needed to omit, how to make each sentence work as fluidly as possible. And then at the end, I changed the stanzas so that it's in like poetic stanzas, because I was looking at the way that we communicate as a generation with text messages and the kind of brevity that we employ when we communicate with each other. And I thought that that would be a good way to release the book, because it makes it more accessible to our generation, especially for people that don't read too frequently. Because I wanted to be literary. There's a lot of subtext, a lot of metaphor, a lot of symbolism, but at the same time, I wanted it to be kind of a hybrid literary genre novel where it was easy to read and that more people could read it, but then certain people that are literary could appreciate the literary merits of the work as well. And you're seeing that happen more frequently, these hybrid books. I think it's a very, very good choice, because you're not marginalizing your audience. You're making it so that anyone can read it, instead of just, some stuffy, pretentious literary crowd. And I think that that's really important. So those are the things that got me started for the writing process. And getting a style and voice, that came by the 7th or 8th rewrite. Like, my style is distinct. A lot of people say on my audiobook that even though it's not me that's actually reading the book on the Audible version of Wasting Talent, they can hear my voice in it. Or people say that they read my book and they can literally hear me saying the stuff. That is not by accident. That is a very conscientious effort to have my own voice, And then the style, itself, there's some idiosyncrasies in my book that were stylistic choices. So I had style and voice, but that doesn't come right away. And don't be worried if the first efforts that you put out of your writing don't have the style and voice that it will ultimately be, because it takes years to develop it. But those are the things that are most important to have a style and voice. So you need to read, you need to come up with about 8 core stories for your book, come up with a metaphorical narrative to string it all together, and then you need to write and read every day. So while you're writing your book, you need to be committing yourself to reading at least an hour a day. And it is going to help you immensely with being able to create your own novel, because you're learning effective tricks of the trade that established writers are already using. And those are very, very, very important. And then you have to do the rewrites, Do a draft. I think it's very important. I think it was Hemingway that said, write drunk, edit sober. And he didn't mean that in a literal sense. It's a figurative adage. Hemingway's basically saying on your first draft, just don't even make a conscious effort to edit as you go. It should be almost like a stream of consciousness. Just write the story. Write down a story. I like to start with writing longhand, because I feel like it's more intimate. It's like you almost feel like an artist, writing on a canvas, and you're able, I write it. Another thing that I do that I think's weird, a lot of people will say this when they see me write, I never write on lined paper. And the reason that I don't do that is I feel like the lines on the paper can make me try to fit into the little space to write it. And if I just write it on a blank piece of paper and it's all like in weird meandering, like one sentence is going this way, one's going this way, and then I cross stuff up as I go. That's real stream of consciousness. And then after I write it on a blank piece of paper, I'll go back and I'll get a different pen, a red pen, and I'll cross out certain stuff and I'll write little notes. So I have this like crazy page where it's like a bunch of just like crazy writing and scribbles, but I can make sense of it. And I see the red and I see the edits that I made. And then eventually I'll put what I wrote on the computer, and I'll type it, and then I'll do an additional rewrite after I do that. And that's like that's my process these days. That's what I learned in prison, and I still use that same method to this day. I write on the blank piece of paper, and then I'll edit it, and then once I've done that draft, that second edit draft, then I'll put it on a computer. That's a third draft, and then I'll do a fourth polished draft after that. And I found that that's the best writing that I do. On the thumbnail of this lesson, I'm gonna put I'll put a page of like some of my most recent writing from June Gloom, and you'll see how I do it with like the scribbles and just how disorganized it looks. But you'd be surprised how that little tip right there, that little trick that I use, how much that's gonna help you with having unadulterated expressionism, unadulterated, just completely undiluted stream of consciousness creative flow. And then you take what you've done after you do that and you refine it into something and make it more polished, and then you have a great final product when you're done with it. And it's really helped me with that. That's pretty much my writing process. And we'll get into character development and subtext, metaphor, pacing. Pacing is super important. You have to have a good pace. I'll tell you how to structure a novel with a beginning, middle, and end. We'll go over on the next lesson on how to turn your crazy life experiences into a book and film. We'll go over like more of the actual technical terms. I'll get you familiar with the lexicon of being a writer, the different terminologies used, and we'll go into each one, how to develop characters, how to do the plot, how to do really everything that you need to do to be able to put something good out there. And hopefully, I'll teach you about publishing and how I did that, and I'll show you how to promote it, and hopefully you can do the same thing that I did, because it's, my writing career has brought me countless blessings, from the people that I've met. I've become friends with so many other writers, people that are investing in me, that now I'm like know them on a personal level. I've made a lot of good friends in the literary community, in the film world, and it's just been an incredible journey. And it makes me proud that I went through so much and I didn't let what other people said affect me to the point where I didn't stop pursuing my dreams. I've been chasing creative stuff since I was 18. I'm 34 now, and I'm finally in a position where I'm being recognized for it, and I'm able to provide for myself. But you got to remember, in all those years that I was chasing it, I made a lot of mistakes, and hopefully during this video series I can tell you all about them. You don't have to make the same mistakes as me, and you can have a more expedited trajectory to where you want to get to. And if you want to buy my book, Wasting Talent, it's on Amazon. There's a paperback version, and I donate all the proceeds from the paperback to sending free books into people that are incarcerated. If you have somebody incarcerated, a loved one, I encourage you to write them a postcard. Just say, I'm thinking of you. Give me their address. I'll send them a free book, and I'll send them a postcard of encouragement as well. I'll also hook them up with a pen pal if you want me to. I also have a digital version, and I keep the royalties for that. And I also have a audio version on Audible. And you can sign up. If you don't already have Audible, you can sign up for the service. And during the 30-day free trial, they let you get one title for free. You can get Wasting Talent for free just for signing up for Audible. And, I get credit for that. So that helps me out. There's also ways to donate to me. I'll have the link for the GoFundMe below. Every time you send me a GoFundMe, I put you on a raffle. I do a live every Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard, and I give away free pocket buttholes, free signed copies of Wasting Talent, t-shirts. I have merchandise up too. Link will be up for that. You know, I'm hoping to teach you guys, and I'm not charging for this. This is just me trying to, you know, impart my knowledge and what I've learned from my experience as a self-published independent artist. And hopefully I can get you to a place where you can have this kind of accomplishment under your belt and you can use it to help other people. That's what it's all about, guys. You know, it's about capitalizing on your past mistakes and then using that platform to help affect change and make the world a better place. I appreciate you so much for checking my stuff out. Hit like, subscribe, whatever everyone else on YouTube begs for at the end of videos. Do all that. It's certainly appreciated. Po la bra.